And so what was the first, if you can remember, what was the first moment or lesson or thing where you were like, whoa, 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 hold up. This is kind of dark and maybe this isn't what I want to be a part of.
Hmm.
Or was it like slow over time?
It was really, really slow over time and then all at once. And the all at once didn't happen until I was 26.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Michele, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast Growing Up Fundie. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm
Excellent.
happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. So I thought that your story was particularly interesting because you mentioned that your parents weren't the religious ones. You were the one who got interested in religion when you were younger, which is
Hmm.
a lot different than a lot of the people I talk to. I mean, it's called growing up fundy. Most of us, were involved in church from a young age.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Were they non-religious at all, or were they religious and didn't go to church?
Um, yeah, I always say that I always joke that I did it to myself when I talk about my religious trauma because a lot of people's
Yeah.
parents like force them to go. Um, but I grew up in a really small town. Didn't even feel like a town really because we went somewhere else for everything. But point is, my mom's family has been in that area for like hundreds of years,
Wow.
and a grandfather back founded the church that's there. And so my grandmother was super involved. And it was like, there is a church, a post office, and a gas station, and a couple restaurants that are all attached to gas stations. Like, there's
Wow.
nothing. So there, as a kid, that was like all there was to do besides going to school. And then my mom had had her own experience with that specific crowd at that specific church and just like didn't really vibe with it, so she didn't feel a need to go. And so I would just always go with my grandmother. And my dad, he's not from the South, so he didn't have it as like ingrained in him to go to church either. So he didn't mind not going. And so they were like, if you want to go, you can go with her, but we're not going.
Interesting. So it's
Hmm.
not that they were atheists, they were just more like secular, just kind of like we don't need to go to
Hmm.
church.
Yeah, my mom was
Interesting.
like, I don't like those people. They're not very nice. And they weren't.
I'm
But I didn't understand that at the time.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me when I hear about people who did not grow up in micro towns in the South who choose to live there. And I'm always like, what is that like from the
Yes.
outside? Like what kind of convincing skills did your mom have to be like, hey, come down here and stay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it was the free land was part
Oh,
of it
that would do it. That would
to
do it.
build their house on. And then it was probably a decent sell of like, it probably sounded fun,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it always sounds nice to like
like
move from the
quaint,
city.
you know.
Yes. And so you got involved in church and were
Hmm.
you pretty serious about it? Did you get pretty involved pretty quick or was it more like social for a long time? What was the beginning for you?
I really, I was gonna like waffle on that. I really did get pretty serious about it pretty quickly. Um, but I think it was because like I understood the formula of like how to make the adults happy and how to like fit in, and so it felt
Yes.
attainable. So, but I
Yes.
did really, I went all the way in. Um, so yeah, from the jump, I was a star in the youth group, just
Yeah.
very much so.
And how old would you have been at that point?
Um, when I really started getting into stuff, I would say probably 12, 13.
For some reason, I feel like that's when we all become like our most
Mm-hmm.
evangelical. It's like 12 or 13. There's like a moment we all go through where we're like, I'm gonna post Bible verses on the internet and carry
Uh-huh.
my Bible to school, and
Oh, I
so
got way worse as
sure,
time went on. But
yeah,
yeah, that was when I first was like youth group forever and always.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
you had mentioned that once you got involved, your youth pastor gave you a lot of kind of responsibility within that. Like he kind of saw you as almost like a group leader of sorts.
Yeah, so, like, I was in one youth group, um, until I was probably, like, 14. That was the one at my family's, like, old church, and someone made a comment that was, like, off, and, my mom was like, "Alright, we're not doing this anymore." Um, and we started going to a church plant, which is, like, startups for
Yeah.
church.
Startups for evangelicals.
Yeah, so it was like that was Southern Baptist, and then we moved to this, like, non-denominational church plant that was meeting in my high school's auditorium, and it was then because the youth group had, like, 10 people in it, and so, like, I had an opportunity to, like, excel, and I got a lot of yeah, I started getting a lot of responsibility. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
And so at that time, did everything that you were learning and everything that was kind of being impressed upon you, was it all stuff that you were on board with? You were like, yes, this is the life I want? Or was it pretty difficult to follow all the rules? What were your experiences like at the time?
I didn't necessarily have, any trouble, like, following the rules, but I really struggled a lot with, I always, as far back as I can remember, had this, like, feeling that I didn't really buy the whole thing, and I just kept ignoring that, and I, like, shamed myself a lot for it because I was like, "Oh, you shouldn't doubt." And so that part was really hard for me. The rule following was not hard for me. Uh, I was, like, a really anxious kid, and so, like, breaking any rule ever was, like, a nightmare to me. So, like, I didn't have as much trouble, like, not going to parties or, like, whatever it was just more so, like, I'm doing all the right things, but I still don't think that I am making the mark. Like, my mom always tells a story about how I came home from church camp, like, convinced I was going to hell, and I'm pretty sure that was because, like, they were like, "Are you really sure you believe?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know."
You're like, well, now I'm
What
gaslit,
is
so I have no
sure?
idea. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what did your parents think about the whole thing? Did they seem concerned or have they since expressed any concern about that time in your life?
Yeah, my mom said she was very concerned. Um, yeah, she was very concerned, and, she didn't want me to go back to camp, especially after I came back really upset, and, yeah, she thought that I spent a weird amount of time at church, I would say. I
Yeah.
think that both my parents had very, like, stereotypical high school experiences, and so I think they were both confused about my choices there. Um, Not so much concerned when I was in high school, but I think when I was a kid and, like, really wrestling with all the stuff, my mom was like, I don't know about that."
Yeah. And was your dad like having not grown up that way himself, was he as concerned or did he have different concerns?
I don't know if he was necessarily concerned. I do remember him asking me a lot of questions,
Yeah.
and I could tell that he was trying to get me to think about what I was saying a lot. Like, I remember him asking me one time, like, if I thought that, a child born in the Middle East and never hears the story that I'm out here trying to tell, if I really believed that that child who's never done anything wrong and just simply didn't hear about it, if I really believed they were going to hell, like, he was trying to, like, get me to think about it. And then they also would ask me a lot of questions about, uh, whether being gay was okay. They were just like, "I don't understand what you're saying."
Yeah.
Um, and I remember
So
having, like, arguments about it with
did you
which is
think
very
like
funny.
did you think it was like your job to kind of lead them to the light almost? Wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting. This is such
I
a
had a lot of
reverse.
yeah, I had a lot of other adults even, like, um, kind of reinforcing that thought process of, like, "Oh, like, I need to get my parents to start coming to church, and, like, it's my
Wow.
responsibility to, like, to do that." Yeah.
That's so much to put on a kid. Jeez
Yeah.
Louise. And to make you doubt your own parents. That's wild.
Mhm.
That's why, and like to put kind of impress upon you at such a young age, like you're actually better than them. And if you
Mhm.
know, but now it's your job to try and lead them this way. Wow, that's wild. And so, what was the first, if you can remember, what was the first moment or lesson or thing where you were like, whoa, 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 hold up, this is kind of dark and maybe this isn't what I want to be a part of?
Mm.
Or was it like slow over time?
It was really, really slow over time and then all at once. And the all at once didn't happen until I was 26.
What happened there?
So, um, I had graduated college, and so I was out of like, I was in a very cult-like atmosphere all of college.
Really?
Um, yeah, that
Interesting.
was,
I feel like that's usually when people get
yeah.
out of that stuff. That's interesting.
No, I doubled down. I doubled down real hard. Um,
Why do you think that was?
I think it was just my formula for getting approval, honestly, because I really like in high school, I was like when I say I had a lot of responsibility, like I was leading small groups and there were nights when I would lead worship and then put down my guitar and then do the sermon as like a 16-year-old because my youth pastor was telling me
Oh,
like, wow, you're brilliant, like people need to hear you talk, like you should do this. And I'm like, now I look back, I'm like, I just did this dude's like whole job. Am I allowed to cuss? Because I cuss
oh,
a lot and I don't
oh,
want to
no,
like
that's
okay,
totally
cool.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally fine. Um, wow, that's wild. I'm glad it was like a do my job for me and not like a grooming situation. That makes me feel like a
Yeah, he
little bit
never
better
did
for sure.
anything like
Yeah,
creepy. It was like emotional grooming a lot. It was like a
totally.
guy that was very insecure and all of his friends were teenagers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
And then as
totally.
we grew up, he started to resent us for not needing him. And that was a very
Whoa.
interesting turn in
And
his
like, well, and now that you're saying that, like, that fits what I remember too, but I never
Mhm.
like thought of it that way. That's so interesting. Yeah, he wanted all of us to like him even though we were way younger. And then when we grew up and we like didn't need him, he became resentful. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Before we even left for college, he was like, "Yeah, you guys are gonna forget all about me. I bet you're not even
Oh,
gonna talk to me
geez.
anymore."
One
And
of
then he
those.
like stopped talking to us. Like I was like, "Okay,
You
fine."
can't quit me, I quit you.
Yeah, exactly.
Teenagers who I'm a full-grown adult mourning
Yeah,
over.
he's still doing it, man.
That's
Like,
wild. That's
mhm,
so interesting. Man, I hate when people do that whole, "Oh, well, you're just gonna forget about me, it's fine."
mhm.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
And so so in college, you were, like, really into it, and then what, like, got you out? Because it sounds like you were pretty heavily involved.
Yeah, I was super heavily involved. I was at the college ministry. I did like 3 times a week, I wanna say. Um, and the whole time I am having these thoughts, like, as I'm sitting in these services, like, I would have a thought, like, a really like, "I don't think that doesn't sound right to me." And then I would be like, "Well, you just need to have more faith," or whatever it is you tell yourself, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, out of college, like, I just wasn't there as much, and so I guess I mean, honestly, they didn't have as much access to my mind and self-esteem, and so I think I started the questions I had been asking all along, like, started to get a little bit louder, and I tried to find a church that I, like, clicked with and wanted to that could, like, take the place of the college ministry thing. And a lot of my friends still went to church and stuff, and eventually, like, my core group of friends, we found, like, a really liberal and to this day, I think they're great people. They're some of the most lovely people I've ever met. We found a really liberal Methodist church and started going there. And that was really it was like a real callback to like the when church was like more social and more like activism driven and less about like whether or not you're going to hell. It was more like I mean, I think there were people there that were actually agnostics and atheists and they just like liked the community and the
Yeah.
activism they were doing because they were really involved in like immigration stuff and
Wow.
they like trying to become a sanctuary church to like house elite undocumented folks. So they were doing a lot of really cool stuff. And like I'm a therapist, all my friends are social workers at that point, and so it was like we really uh, clicked with those people. And I think they're all like really brilliant and kind. I love them all. But we were going there, and it was a Methodist church. I had grown up mostly Baptist, and then my college ministry was Methodist. And then I don't know if you heard about uh, the Methodist church started like debating affirming gay people and like ordaining gay people, LGBTQ people in general. It like came up for debate at the Methodist conference, and so um, that was happening literally around the same time that I'm in therapy, like processing my own sexuality and realizing for the first time in my life, I swear, like people are like, I don't believe you because of all of the experiences.
Yeah.
But I had been like so like brainwashed that I just never even considered the option that I was gay. I was just like, that is simply
Interesting.
not an option. It wasn't like I knew I was and I suppressed it. It was just
Right.
like my brain didn't even consider it. And it got real bendy to support that reality for me.
Yeah.
But I was starting to like come to the realization that like, oh, that super close friendship wasn't just a toxically close friendship. That was an actual like relationship. Um,
Interesting.
and so that was happening at the same time this debate popped up. And I don't know why I did this, but I joined a committee at the church that was like spearheading the church discussion about where we were going to land on that issue.
Were you pro at the time, or did you think you were not pro?
Um, every most everyone at the church was pro.
Okay.
There were like there were gay couples going to the church. There it as we had meetings and stuff. Some people it started to become clear that there were some people that weren't as on board. I assume the whole church was 100% on board because it just they had up until that point. You know, a lot of churches say they welcome everyone and then they don't, but this one up until that point had been like very much true to their word on that. Um, but yeah, there did start to be some debate. I think they actually got a new pastor over the issue, so which I really respect because they like were just zero tolerance on intolerance, really. Uh, so
Good.
yeah, it
That's
was
great.
the most of the church was affirming, but it was just it was like it was really intense to be realizing that I belonged in a group that we were debating the validity of at the same time that we were debating the validity of it. Like I was like a lot for me to do all at one time. Um, and I think
Wow.
I
So like
started,
did
yeah, go ahead.
at the time, like did you feel like what you were voting on applied to you, or you hadn't quite processed that it applied to you yet?
I would say I like I like 70% felt that it applied to me. I hadn't told anyone yet except for my therapist at that
Got it.
point. And so like as it kept going and then several of my friends, my close friends also were having the same journey I was having, which was insane because it just happened for us all at once.
Yeah.
And they were going to the church as well. Once we started like talking to each other about that, that was when I was like, okay, yes, this applies to me.
Yeah.
Um, which really like fast tracked the like, yeah, I remember I was just sitting in a service one Sunday and a couple Sundays in a row, I was sitting there and I would just like feel really angry. And they weren't doing or saying anything that was out of line or was unkind or not affirming or anything. They would just like be talking about Jesus or something. And I would just start feeling very angry. And it occurred to me that I did not have to go there anymore if I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to it timed out perfectly for the joke. I was like, I'm giving up church for Lent. And I did. And then I just never went back.
What do you think it was that was making you so angry since they weren't necessarily saying anything? They weren't saying like the hallmark things that usually would make
Hmm.
someone angry in that situation.
I think being so close to the like debate and having it be so up in the air, um, like becoming friends with a couple that went to the church and volunteered in the church and was loved by the church, and then like knowing that they couldn't get married in the church that they like gave so much time to, and which triggered that in me because like I had spent my whole life just trying to get these people to like me and doing
Yeah.
everything they asked of me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had some really horrible shit happen in college and my youth pastor wasn't there. Like, um, our freshman year, my best friend and like several other people from the youth group, like she died very suddenly at 18.
Wow.
So yeah, that happened and like no church people were there. And so I
Why?
was like, I mean, there was like a week of we're so sorry. And then other than that, like Um, there was our small group leader, like mine and my friend's small group leader she was pretty supportive, which kind of turned into like I mean, they didn't help her very much either, with how to handle it. And yeah, none of the leaders really like addressed me about it. And
That just
I
seems
mean,
so odd, like,
yeah.
especially for because you set them up to be like the more liberal leaning, the more like accepting, the more activist, and yet
Oh
in the
no,
moment,
this was
oh,
my
this is
college ministry. So
oh,
sorry.
got it, got it, got it, got it.
Yeah,
No,
my college
that makes
ministry.
way more sense. I was like,
Those
they
people would
didn't.
have been like
Got
in
it.
my home cooking for me. Um,
I was gonna say like that's so surprising. I've never even met these people, and I'm surprised.
no, 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 no. They would have
Got
been
it.
lovely. But
Got it.
yeah, it was like my college ministry, all these people that I was giving so much time to, they just weren't there. And like
Mm.
one Wednesday I was like sitting there and the like lead pastor of the college of this giant college ministry just like starts talking about my friend dying, like uses it in his sermon. And I had no heads up. And this was like maybe a month after it happened, like not even. And I was like,
Whoa.
man, it's like that.
Yeah.
um so yeah, it was just like all culminating for me, like as I'm like sitting there feeling angry and like I've given my whole life to these people. They weren't there for me when I needed them to be. They've made me like question things. Because my high school friends were really into predestination. And so there was a lot of like, after my friend died, there was a lot of like, oh, this was for God's glory and he planned for this to happen and that kind of stuff. And so I was
Well,
like,
that makes him an
yeah,
asshole. So
exactly.
makes him a big asshole.
Yeah. And so
Wow.
like that was the kind of thoughts I was having as I was sitting there. I was like, and now here we are. I'm up for debate again. Like I don't even believe in it. Like I think that was when I finally like sat with myself and I was like, you don't believe this stuff. Um and it was very freeing to like admit that and be like,
Yeah.
I'm putting myself through so much shit and I'm not getting the belonging I thought I was going to get. And I don't believe the thing that they want me to believe anyway. And even if I did, I wouldn't belong because they've decided
Yeah.
that now. So like I just got fed up and I gave up church for Lent and I literally never went back. Like I've been in a church like 2 or 3 times since then. Um
Interesting. It's
yeah.
almost like the way you describe it is very interesting because it's almost like you had to come out twice. You had to
Mhm.
come out as that you didn't believe and this wasn't your lifestyle anymore, and obviously came out, in the LGBTQ sense. Um, and so what do you
Mhm.
consider yourself now? Are you religious, atheist, agnostic, spiritual?
Um I I don't know about, I guess it would be atheist, maybe agnostic. I don't I definitely like have spiritual beliefs and
Mhm.
um like my spiritual beliefs are more tied to now like that part of me that I was ignoring my whole life, just like whatever feels right to that part is religion to me. Like it's
Got it.
whatever makes me feel connected to other people and helps me feel at peace about like being here,
Got
whatever
it.
it is that makes me feel that way. Like I'm kind of like choosing my own religious texts, I call them sometimes, like
Yeah.
um yeah, and I mean that like episodes of TV are religious texts for me now. Like I just like there's meaning in life to me. Like I don't think like, oh, it's just like nothing means anything.
Yeah.
Um but I don't have like a deity or anything.
Right.
It's more like radical acceptance and
Yeah, like you have
don't
your
be a
own
dick.
version of worship,
Yeah.
to an
Mhm.
extent, like meditation almost. Interesting. And so then you became a therapist, and
Mhm.
I read on your bio that you talk about how you work with people from the LGBTQ community, you work with people who have spiritual trauma. Is that, do you find that to be more difficult or easier coming from your background? Is it like triggering, or is it that you come from a level of understanding that a lot of people wouldn't come from?
Um, it can be a little bit triggering. Um, I still see my therapist. I've been seeing her for like 5.5 years,
That's awesome.
at least every other week. So,
Yeah.
to handle like the things that about my job that trigger me, because I also am an addiction therapist, which has its own stuff.
Mhm.
Um, But yeah, it can be triggering, but I think more than anything, it's surprising like how universal the experience is.
Yeah.
And the hardest part is just I still like have a lot of personal anger, but then like anger on their behalf of just like how pervasive it gets in your mind and in like the way you talk to yourself and the way you see the world and the like way you see your worth, and it just like gets so in everything that it's really hard to untangle. And so I think that's the hardest part, is seeing other people um with that. But it is also like it's an experience that's like, unless you've been through it, you have a hard time understanding it. And so I think like my lived experience is my greatest asset, especially with those clients. And so like it also feels really good to be able to use what I went through to help other people get
Yeah.
out or feel okay about forming their own beliefs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And do you find as a therapist that you ever give people advice that you secretly know you would have a difficult time following? Like when we give our friends dating advice and we know that we should like take our own dating advice, do you ever give them like good advice, but
Hmm.
you're like, I need to listen to this too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's interesting. I've
um
always wondered that. I've always wondered if they sit there thinking like what I just told them is correct, but also I don't even I don't even do that. I need to do that.
yeah, sometimes it holds me accountable where I'm like, you know, if I can ask someone else to do this and I really believe that it's the right thing to do, then why can't I do it for myself? Why can't I be as nice to myself as I'm being to them? That's kind of how I
Yeah.
frame it. And then that'll kind of motivate me sometimes. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely often tell people to do a lot of things I don't do myself.
And do your parents ever like talk about that period anymore? Like do you guys ever address it or is it just kind of in the past? Like what did they think when you finally were done?
Um, it's funny, like sometimes I get the vibe that they don't entirely believe me. Like I'll say like, yeah, because I don't believe that stuff anymore. And they're like, yeah, well, you're still like spiritual, right? Because I think for them, like there's still a cultural element to it. Neither of them go to church, but I think it's just something about like hearing me say I don't believe in that has this like knee jerk, well, don't make up your mind. Which is what they were saying when I did believe in it.
Yeah,
So,
right, right.
um, but yeah, it's mostly just as I've been sorting through it, like I'll think of like an absolutely unhinged thing that I did or said or that I was asked to do. And I'll be like, "Do you remember this? That was insane, right?" And my mom's like, "Yeah, I tried to tell you that it was insane."
Do you remember
Um,
like any examples of that kind of thing?
yeah. Uh, there's all kinds of stuff that like, especially as I like have gotten older and made new friends and friends that don't like my girlfriend wasn't raised in that way, um, at all. And so, yeah, I'll say something and then they're like, "Wait, excuse me? Like that's absolutely insane." Um,
Yeah. Oh, I
like,
relate
do you
so
know
hard.
about the everything skit? We were just talking about that at dinner last night.
No.
You don't know about the everything skit?
I don't
Oh my
know, maybe,
gosh.
but that doesn't sound familiar. What is that?
It was set to this Lifehouse song that was really like it had like Dare You to Move vibes. Very like
All right.
emotionally manipulative in the way that only Christian
Oh,
music can be.
oh yeah. In the way that
um,
only youth group on a Wednesday night can be.
exactly. And like the premise of it is it starts off with this girl dancing with the Lord, and then he like spends her out, and while she's away a sin steps in between them, and so the different people represent each sin, and it's like alcohol, um dating, there's like a romantic demon, I guess they're supposed to be. It starts with dating, then it's alcohol, and then it's money, and then it's an eating disorder. And for that one,
Is that a sin?
you
Or is that like a
I
mental
think it
health
was
concern?
supposed to be vanity is what they were
Oh,
trying to
okay.
get at, but the like choreography, I guess for lack of a better word, you the girl that's being separated from God like makes herself throw up, pretends to make mimes making herself throw up on the stage. And then there's a and then the next one is it's like someone in like a Grim Reaper costume that comes up. And if you really want to go all out for this part, you put a little red paint on the fake knife. But he has her like cut her arms, the Grim Reaper, and then he presses a gun into her hand. And um the
And they did this
girl
at church?
mimes, oh girl, the girl mimes putting a gun to her head. And then so all these sins are lined up now, like as their scene ends they go and stand between, and so now they're all lined up like swaying back and forth, and Jesus is over there like waving. And I think he also mimes like dying on a cross and raising from the dead. And then like at the climax of the story, he's over there waving, like trying to get her attention. And then she's like, holding a gun to her head, and she like throws the gun down and tries to run back to Jesus. But now all these sins are in the way and they're pushing her. And spoiler alert, I played the main girl for several years, not in the
Whoa.
official skit, but for like
Yeah,
youth groups would learn it. And like I was the girl. I sprained my wrist during this scene. I like threw myself at
that's
all the sins,
dedication.
and this guy clotheslined me, and I just like flew backwards. But I was really dedicated. And then Jesus like steps in and he throws them all on the ground, and they dance together again, and he walk off into the sunset. And that is a thing that I learned to do on a
I am
mission trip in
shook.
Costa Rica, and I did it in front of elementary school children in Costa Rica. And then I returned to America and did it at my high school for like FCA.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really messed up of them to
Yeah.
like, wow. And also, I
Yeah.
love the message that it's like, hey, I have an eating disorder. And they're like, oh, wow, how vain.
Hmm.
Like, ew, gross.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild. But like, so the worst part about that is that people in your life had convinced you that that was a good thing to do.
Hmm.
Like, in my opinion, that's not an example of you doing a bad thing or like you being,
No. Yeah.
that's you doing exactly what adults and leadership in your life told you you should be doing and you should be proud of. And so you do it with conviction, right? Like you said,
Hmm.
you like sprained your wrist in this thing, right? Like I remember doing things with like such conviction.
Hmm.
Um, and later on in life, you're left to feel like that was something that you did and you decided. And there seems to be this forgotten element that it's like
Hmm.
everyone was telling me that I was doing the right thing. Like everyone was praising this
Yeah.
behavior. And yet we're the ones stuck with the whole like, ooh, how weird, how strange. Like,
Hmm.
interesting, wild. And you did that every year?
It was like a 2 year period after I learned it. It was like a skill I would like trot out if we needed something.
Wow.
Because there's like those certain nights of church camp where it's like everybody's got to cry,
Yeah. Yes.
and that
Yes.
one will make people cry
Yes.
real hard. So
Yeah,
we would
that's such a
just,
good way to put it.
bring that out whenever we needed to manipulate people into becoming Christians.
It's like I'm like shook because like you're just you're saying it so casually, but it's so true. You're just like
Hmm.
you're saying it more casually than I'm used to hearing. I'm still like taken aback. And you're like, that's how we manipulated people. Whoa. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, yes, but wow. Um, so wild. And so what do you think was harder for you to do to admit to yourself that that was no longer your lifestyle and you didn't want to be involved, or like be open about being gay? Which was more difficult, or did you face the most judgment for?
Mm. It's hard because none of the judgment I would say I got was like overt.
Got it.
It was more so like my friends from college, we drifted apart, and who's to say if it was because we were friends from college and we drifted apart, or if it's
Right.
because I never really felt the need to like come out. I was just like, this is how I'm gonna live my life now. And if you have questions to ask about it, then I dare you to ask them. Like, I don't think that you guys are gonna. So,
Yeah.
and I think that was more so the like fading out was the timing was a little bit conspicuous of like, you know, I would have a conversation with a friend about how not even that I felt like I was gay, but just that I was thinking that probably the Bible didn't actually mean that it was bad. And we would slowly drift apart. Um, so
Interesting.
yeah, I don't think that it was like, I think it was harder for me to undo all of the church stuff than it was realizing I was gay. Kind of felt like a relief.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things really made sense. Um, but the church stuff has taken a lot of time to unpack.
Yeah.
And like I still am pulling things out of my like perception that I realize that that's where it's from. Like I'm
Yeah.
still sorting through all of that and untangling it because it's
Yeah.
so much a part of who I am.
Right.
So I
And I
think that was
think
harder.
and that makes it extra interesting that it wasn't even familial
Hmm.
pressure. It wasn't
Yeah.
parental pressure at all. Like, that's what makes this so interesting because so many of the people I talk to, it's because of how they grew up and like generations of their family living a certain way. And that's where
Hmm.
the pressure comes from. And you're like, you said at the beginning, like, I did it myself. Like, that's the wildest part about all this. And
Yeah.
so, are you an only child?
No, I
From
have a younger brother.
did they, like, ever say anything about it or get involved, or did you ever take them to church too, or how did that go?
He kind of followed in my footsteps.
Interesting.
In college, he got kind of involved. Like his major had more like to get involved in, and so I think that took up a lot of his time. And he actually would catch shit from people at the college ministry for spending too much time not there, as they do. Um,
Wow.
so he didn't have as dramatic of a fade out, and I think he like still goes to church every now and then, but he definitely felt more comfortable like living his own life. Like we had to sign this thing in college called the Covenant.
Yes.
If you were on leadership, where you couldn't drink in public or sleep at the opposite sex's house. Um,
Was
and
that, like I'm always interested for people who, like, find out they're gay, is that like, "Oh, I can't sleep at the opposite sex's house," but,
yeah, exactly. It's like looking back now, I'm like, yeah, guys, no problem. And little did you know what was happening. Because
literally,
it
it's
wasn't
like,
just
"Thanks for
me like
encouraging
in
me."
the college ministry. There are so many other people that have come out since college that were
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, they were respecting the contract they signed, but they did not. There were some loopholes for sure that they didn't consider.
That's a very diplomatic way of saying it.
Hmm.
Um, Interesting. And so you is that what made you decide to become a therapist, or was that interest kind of on its way before you decided to leave the church and come out as gay?
Um, this has been something I've been thinking a lot about over the past year. I don't know. I think it wasn't. It definitely wasn't like my. It wasn't like I went through all of it and then was like, you know what, I'm going to do. I'm going to be a therapist to help people. Because I was already on the trajectory by the time that I realized all of these things. I was already. I don't think I had finished. I had just finished grad school actually. Um, but I do think that all of it led to me being a therapist in that like I I was being told that the best thing that I could do is help other people. And you have to like love the least of these and like serve, 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 serve. And so as I was like nearing the end of college, I was a social work major in college. So that was, I never changed my major. Also, I went in social work because I was like, this is how you do that, but still go to school.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think as my opportunities to like have my whole life like enmeshed with that stuff and like serve in that way diminished because I was becoming an adult and needed to like have a career. It was kind of just like a natural progression to enter into a helping profession. Um, I'm a really good therapist and I really enjoy it. I think I have a lot of good instincts. I think a lot of them were developed from that experience. And
Mhm.
I don't, and I just never considered any other options. And so sometimes I wonder if I just ended up here because it was the thing that was the closest to what I thought they wanted from me. Like, don't get me wrong, I love my job. But when I'm
Yeah, yeah.
experiencing like burnout or like or thinking about my other skills and my other strengths that I never get to use, I'm like, wow, I wish someone had would have like stopped me for 5 seconds because people were like, "Are you sure you're not gonna make very much money?" And I was like, "I don't care. I love everyone." And they were like, "Cool." And that was like the extent of it.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I wish someone would have had me stop and think, because I think that it did contribute a lot to me being a therapist, but not because it was traumatic, but because of how they groomed me to be.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like I wonder, like, chicken and egg situation, what
Right.
would have happened.
Yeah, or like if you didn't feel this like push to keep people from going through what you went through, if you never went through that, it makes you wonder
Hmm.
like what other instincts, what are some other things that you would do if this wasn't what you were doing? Like talents or interests?
Um, I always really enjoyed writing when I was in high
Mhm.
school. Um, and now that I have my ADHD figured out, I feel like that would be a lot less overwhelming
Same.
to me.
Yeah.
Um, I really enjoyed writing. I really enjoy being creative. I do art sometimes. I don't really put it out there,
Yeah.
but like I wonder if someone had like noticed that and like told me to pursue graphic design or literally anything else.
Yeah.
Besides just like vicariously traumatizing myself for
Yeah.
40 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of what has led to my private practice isn't traumatizing in that way, but like a lot of the jobs you have to have as a therapist before you get there are
Yeah.
domestic violence shelters and rehabs and
Right.
that kind of stuff. So it's been a lot. Um,
I bet.
yeah.
And it's I imagine it's tough because part of you is like, I wish somebody had stepped in and said something, and then the other part of you thinks like, what kind of adult is gonna be like, "No, don't help people. Don't."
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
I
tough
don't
because
know.
like, I don't have kids, but I imagine if I had a kid who was like, "I really just wanna help people get over the worst periods in their life and their mental
Mhm.
traumas," like, would I say no? I don't know. I don't know if I would
Yeah.
say no. Wow, that's so interesting. And so, if you had to give advice to somebody who maybe is going through what you went through, maybe they're on the fence, maybe they've just crossed that threshold, but they don't quite know where to go from here, what
Mhm.
would you say? What would you say to them?
For people that are just across the threshold, my biggest thing is just do whatever you want. Literally whatever pops into your head and feels right. I think like Glennon Doyle refers to the feeling as like her knowing, just like, the like feeling in your chest when something feels aligned with who you are or what makes you come alive. Like just do whatever that is, even if it seems stupid or even if other people told you not to do it. Like I just tell people like literally let yourself do whatever you want without questioning it or without questioning your motivation. Um, it's a lot of just being really kind to yourself in all of those stages that you asked about. Is just like be let yourself ask questions and then be very very kind to yourself as you come to the answers. So I think it's
Yeah.
so much about don't question it,
Right.
and that's how they get you
Exactly.
in it. Really is like
Yes.
you may have this thought, but that's Satan, and so you
Yes.
shouldn't listen to it. Like they teach you not to
Yes.
listen to yourself, and so that's why it's so
Exactly.
important to like listen to every gut feeling you have, like validate it and listen to it and follow it, because you have to like repair that relationship with yourself because you've
Yes.
really like
Exactly.
beaten it into submission is what it feels like for me. It's like
That's
I just kept.
I'm so glad you
Yeah.
said that because that's one of the things, like, if you ever feel this way, that's wrong, that's, like,
Mhm.
sinful, and that's you, like, caving to sin and secularity and greed. You just wanna go out and party. That's what you just
Mhm.
wanna go out and party and do bad things, but you wanna make, like you want a good reason to do it, right? So,
Mhm.
it's so interesting. And so from the perspective of a therapist, like, what would you have told younger you? What if you had you as a client and you're like, she's this young evangelical girl who thinks she knows, everything that there is
Mhm.
to know. What would you have said to her, do you think?
I think I just would have, not to be a broken record, just asked a lot of questions in a very gentle
Yeah,
way, because so much of
totally.
being a therapist is just asking someone the right question. Like
Totally.
it's not giving someone advice, it's asking them the question that makes them think of the advice themselves. And so I think I
Yes.
would have just, it could have helped to have that fast tracked to start, to have another adult start really being like, well, why do you think that is? And, oh, does that feel right to you? Um, and just stopping to think about it, because I was thinking about it, but the consequence for verbalizing it at that time was that I lost my whole group of friends and these adults that were giving me this like approval,
Mm-hmm.
because I was in the like in group, like the adults wanted to hang out with me. So like
Wow.
I wasn't going to put that in jeopardy by telling them that I didn't think it was real, or I thought it was stupid that we had to feel so guilty that God gave up his son because he got him back like 3 days later. I really, that was one that like really, I was just like, I get that it was painful, but also like maybe it wasn't because he was God, but also like they would talk about it as if like the part of the thing that was so moving about it was like God gave up his son. I was like, he really didn't.
He really, listen, he
He
took the
really
gift
didn't.
back to Target and he got his money back. I don't know why we're still saying thank you
It's
for this
just,
gift. I don't
it's
know.
like it didn't cost him anything. He had a coupon.
Listen,
Like,
he owned the store. He didn't
mhm.
like he made the return himself.
Also,
Interesting.
he made up the system. He didn't
He
have
did.
to do that.
Like literally nobody told him he had to do that. That was
He
like those whole
decided he had to do that.
that's like that's the best part to me is I'm like there was nobody else making rules. There was literally no one
Yeah.
else. And they're like, "How about you just do some I don't know, some like work on the roads and like pick up trash." It's like, "Nope. Nope, we're
Mhm.
going to go as extreme as possible." It's like,
Yeah.
I don't you could just walk my dog, that'll do. Um
Yeah.
Very interesting. Do you find that you have more joy now than you did before? Like, what brings you joy these days?
Yeah, so much more joy.
Good.
Um, yeah, I like having my Sundays back. I like trusting myself. That really brings me a lot of joy. Not beating myself to death every time I have a sip of alcohol. Um, I get to be in a relationship that I have no qualms about anymore. Like
Yeah.
it's just I got so much back, and I got so much more back than I ever got from any of the stuff that I invested. Like once I
Yeah.
finally let it go, like I was just like, wow, this is just the piece of just not having to constantly be questioning whether or not you're thinking good enough. Um, because one that was like a real hit for our youth group was like, there's no one righteous, not even one. So like the idea that even if you do something good, you didn't do it for the right reason. If you didn't do it 100% for God, you just did it to make yourself feel good. And so
And
like
it's
even
like,
just like questioning myself in that, like,
well, also, it's like, isn't that literally the whole thing? We're all
mhm.
doing all of it just for the reward in the end. Like, isn't that the
Yeah.
whole system? Isn't that like, it's interesting they set the rules that way. And then they're like, also, that
Hmm.
motivation is bad. And you're like,
Yeah, you start pulling at one thread and the whole thing falls apart.
right,
You really
right,
do.
right. But I absolutely love what you said about just asking questions.
Hmm.
Because I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I can't like stress this enough to people. The biggest, most positive changes I think I've ever made as a person were because somebody just asked me the right
Hmm.
questions. You know, like I feel like we all go through that period, especially in our, 18, 19, 20, where like, this is my opinion. Everyone's going to hear it. I'm going to put it on the internet. Like, I'm going
Hmm.
to wear it on t-shirts. And all it takes is somebody we really like and we enjoy hanging out with being like, where'd you get that
Hmm.
thought from? And you're like, record scratch, because nobody's ever asked you
Hmm.
to explain it. You've just been allowed to say whatever and just spew whatever. But the first time somebody asked you, not even confrontationally, just like, oh, why? You're like, I
Yeah.
haven't I didn't plan for this contingency. Like, what do you mean why? And then you start to think of why, and you really don't. And the everything that you think is like your identity and your belief, it turns out is just something somebody told you is what you were supposed to say. You don't
Hmm.
actually believe any of it, or you don't know where it comes from, or you're not sure. It's just all stuff you were told by somebody else, and so you just did it.
Yeah.
Um,
And like
and
before it becomes personal. So like it's like you can talk, I would talk all the time about what I thought, like, yeah, people can be born gay, but like they should be just be celibate. And it's sad, but that's what God wants. and they're suffering for God. And I would say that. And then I started meeting gay people, and then all of a sudden I was a gay person, and I was like, but do it, but what about these people don't, now they're not, it's not hypothetical anymore. And
Right.
now that it's not hypothetical, I can't understand why I ever said it to begin with.
Yes.
Like you start meeting
Everybody,
people that have different faiths that are
yeah,
super great, and you're like, wait, I don't think they're going to hell. Like, I don't even think hell's real. And that's like where the
right,
like ball starts rolling, is again,
right.
you get away from them long enough.
Yeah. Everybody thinks they know what they're going to do in a hypothetical
Hmm.
situation. Everybody, like people can go off on everything they're going to do when this hypothetically happens. And then it happens. And like you said perfectly, it's not hypothetical anymore.
Hmm.
And now you got to put those words into action. And it's not
Hmm.
quite what you thought it was going to be. Um, and I think it's really important that people realize they're allowed to admit that. It's when
Hmm.
they it's when they pretend like, no, 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 that's still what I think. That's still what I think, despite like their hesitations and their reservations. They're just like doubling down on it. That's when
Hmm.
it's toxic. You need to, I feel like normalizing, I was wrong.
Hmm.
Like I have changed my opinion. That is no longer what I think. I think that would be so helpful. But it's like, that's just not the way it works in a lot of
Yeah.
situations, especially when it comes to like religion and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time, for
Yeah,
your
sure thing.
story, for your wisdom. I really appreciated talking to you both from the perspective of someone who, you know, grew up religious, but also from the perspective of your profession, because I think that's such an interesting combination of like thought processes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I also think that you are a great example of how even if somebody says to themselves like, well, I didn't grow up with that family pressure, I didn't grow up with that expectation, that doesn't mean that they can't still have things that are lingering,
Hmm.
like traumas and things that they need to address, maybe in therapy, maybe with friends, maybe with
Hmm.
themselves. And I think you're a great example of the fact that that is an attainable goal, and there is
Hmm.
kind of life after that. And just because you think you know everything that there is to know now doesn't mean that years down the road you can't say to yourself, that's actually not what I believe anymore. I'm
Hmm.
not comfortable saying that anymore. And I think that's wonderful, so thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Thanks. Thank you.